Hare Krishna. Jai Shri Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis everywhere. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Jai Shri Krishna. Jai Shri Mad Bhagavad Gita, as it is. Today we're doing chapter 9, verse 13 to 15. Getting even deeper to the Raja Vidya, the king of secret knowledge. Please join me or not as we welcome our dear friend, Lord and Master, Srimad Bhagavad Gita, as it has been handed down to us today. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnana-timirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Let us begin with verses 13 to 15, as literally translated by H.T. Goswami. But great souls, Partha, sheltered in divine nature and knowing the unchanging source of beings, worship me with undeviated minds, ever praising me and striving with firm vows, bowing to me with devotion. Always linked, they honor me. Yet others, offering with a knowledge offering, honor me in oneness, in separateness, and in the multiform facing everywhere. That's that. The one thing that really jumps out at me is H.T. Goswami uses the word praising instead of chanting. The Sanskrit word is kirtan, basically kirtaniya, kirtanayantaya, something like that. And so Prabhupada translates it as chanting the holy names, which is a longer translation, perhaps not as literal, but I do feel like the word chanting, especially if you're, an ISKCON devotee or just anyone in the Gaudiya sect at all. When you see that word kirtan or any conjugation of that word kirtan in Sanskrit, we really want to see the word chanting in there. Although I believe, once again, that H.T. Goswami is correct in the purely literal translation. Kirtan, Sankirtan means congregational chanting. But what does chanting mean? It means, I think it's like the word bhaj, which means like praising or worship. But actually, I don't know, and I don't remember. You have to break down the word. It's called morphology. Like, what does kir mean? What does tan mean? Like, how do you actually build up the word to get the word mean? And that's what it means. Kirtayanto, that's the word. So it's actually not kirtan, it's kirta yanto. So the yanto, like yantra, could be something like that. A machine of chanting. I don't know. I have no idea. One day, maybe I'll learn how to read a Sanskrit dictionary and just find for myself. Anyway, let's go to verse 13 as Prabhupada translated it. O son of Partha, that's interesting. I think Partha and Partha are translated differently. Yeah, so H.D. Goswami puts the long vowel on the first A, Partha, and then Prabhupada says it's Partha. Oh, yeah, interesting. Once again, there's another interesting just idiosyncrasy, perhaps, between the literal versus colloquial translation. So in Prabhupada's literal word for word translation, it's partha, just how H.D. Goswami does it. But then when he does the English colloquial translation, Prabhupada changes it to perta, and I have no idea why. That's interesting though, because it's not a mistake. There's definitely a reason why. Going again, O son of Perta, those who are not deluded, the great souls, are under the protection of the divine nature. They are fully engaged in devotional service because they know me as the supreme personality of Godhead, original and inexhaustible. So, great souls comes from the Sanskrit Mahatmana, Mahatmanas, Mahatmanas, the great souls. Mahatma is probably great soul, and Mahatmanas is probably great souls, plural. I think it just pluralized there. Yeah, let's get to it. So this verse, the first verse of our cluster, begins by contrasting itself with how the last cluster ended. By in verse 12 was about those who are deluded, bewildered by demonic and atheistic ethos. So now Krishna's making it very clear we're talking about the opposite, those who are not deluded at all. Only 2 paragraphs in the purport here. Second one is very interesting and special, I think. Prabhupada shares some secret knowledge, which is the main theme of chapter 9. And not just secret knowledge that's, fancy for no reason. It's extremely practical in the sense that it should be received, meaning for a devotee who is fully devoted to Krishna, chapter 9 is not some, advanced fancy knowledge that, you just like learn one time and then, you come back to it later some other time. No, you can like relish this over and over again for your whole lifetime and for many generations and centuries and millennia as well. It can be handed down and still constantly be relished at a very high level. And I don't mean relish selfishly. I mean, it's spiritual bliss that spreads. So it spreads from up high down to us, and then we spread it to others around us, and then it goes back up as well. So we're talking about Mahatmanas, great souls, the great devotees, those who are not deluded. And not only that, they really understand Krishna and they're really fully engaging in the worship of the Supreme Lord. So what Prabhupada says in the second paragraph here, which is, I think he's mentioned it before, maybe in this chapter or in one of the more recent chapters, that, there's a 2-armed form of Krishna and a 4-armed form of Krishna, and one is more personal than another. One is more Krishna than another, if that makes sense. I don't want to offend one part of Krishna for the sake of another, but it's just reality. Once again, we are people too, and there are some things that are more personal to us than others. So even though my faith is, quite important to me, as is my job. So if someone, just comes into my classroom and says, "Oh, you're doing it wrong. You're a bad teacher," I'll probably get offended to some degree, But and if someone says, "Oh, I love Krishna and you love Krishna too," that's awesome. I'll be happy and excited to hear that. But you might see me even more excited and over the wall if I meet someone who has some really obscure reference about like, oh, did you hear like there was the Super Nintendo game they used in Trailer Park Boys was a limited edition release that was sold on eBay later for $10,000, and my second cousin has it, and he lives right over there. Like something like really, really particular, but also really mundane, but also really personally relevant to me will make me go nuts. It'll look like I'm having a transcendental fit of madness, but really it's just a personal thing. It's not, and it's not an attachment thing either. It's just, I have my personal loka where in my loka, some things are nice and some things are not nice. And Krishna is the same way, in Krishna loka, he has his form that he's living in there with his associates who like to do his sorts of things. And those Mahatmanas who, are worshiping and connecting with Krishna are really much more interested in the more intimate, more personal Krishna, as opposed to the more impersonal Krishna. Even if it's still a personal form with 4 arms, that's still not as personal as the 2-armed form. And so these great souls who are making this sort of distinction, what to speak of worshiping demigods or worshiping other humans, false idols, this sort of thing. Great souls are not engaged at all in this sort of thing. And that's what, once again, this is what chapter 9 is all about. And especially this verse cluster is like, well, what are the real devotees really doing, right? On to 14. Always chanting my glories. Oh, interesting. So chanting my glories. That word glories is not in the word for word. So it looks like Prabhupada, but it does say satatam, which means always. So, oh, okay. And then it's kirtayanto mam. So mom is me. So literally, most literally, according to Prabhupada, it is the first line is always chanting me. So yes, the next still most literal translation that can make sense in English might be like always praising me, always glorifying me, something like that, which is what H.D. Goswami did. But then Prabhupada did it real nice. He says, always chanting my glories. So he's got the chanting aspect of kirtan in there, plus my, which is mom, and then, but chanting what? In this case, it means my glories, especially my glories, as opposed to my holy names, my pastimes, these sorts of things. That's also true and good, but in this verse and in this line specifically, this is really it. Krishna says, Satatam kirtayanto mam, always doing kirtayanto about me, chanting about me, glorifying me, praising me, me. Let's read the whole verse now. Always chanting my glories, endeavoring with great determination, bowing down before me, these great souls perpetually worship me with devotion. And the first line in the purport is so yummy. I just got to read it. The Mahatma cannot be manufactured by rubber stamping an ordinary man. I wonder why Prabhupada put that in there right away. I wonder how immediate that was in his consciousness with what was going around him. Yes, his symptoms are described here, always engaged in chanting the glories of the Supreme Lord. He has no other business. And in my notes, I wrote this may be the first verse in the Gita that uses the word kirtan. Once again, in this case, it's not exactly kirtan, it's kirtayanta. Kirtayanto, or literally kirtayantaha. But the kirta does mean the same as kirtan. It does have the same root. It's conjugated a little differently, though it may be a compound word. I'm not sure. It may not be simply kirtan that's conjugated. It may be kirtan plus yantaha. That may be a different word that's being combined here. I'm not sure. So there are two main verbs in this verse that talk about the two main activities that the great souls will do for their love for their Lord, who is the Supreme Lord, and that is chanting and bowing. And that's a really good combination. Bowing, the word is namasyantas. So there's that word yanto and yantas. The suffix is the same in both of these verbs. So it's not a conjugation, I'm pretty sure. This is a separate verb that's being combined with like namaste, namaskar, and kirtan. So namas means can mean a bunch of different things, particularly, right? But namasyantascha literally is translated by Prabhupada as offering obeisances. Oh, this is interesting. Namasyantascha mam bhaktya. Offering obeisances unto me in devotion. Mam bhaktya. It's not mat bhakta. He's not saying my bhaktas. It's not the noun form. It's the spirit of bhakti is in their obeisances unto me. This is eternal. That's nitya. Upasate, worship. So it's eternal engaged worship. And the second line is yatantash cha dirtha vrata, with determination, fully endeavoring with determination. So the second, and this is a beautifully structured verse, the second and fourth verse are like the describing verses, and then the first and third, line. The second and fourth line in Sanskrit are describing the first and third line in Sanskrit. And if you look in your Gita and how it's indented, it looks like it's indented like that on purpose as well. It's really showing the first line is like, okay, this is an important thing. And then the second line is indented to say, okay, well, that's like sub point. And then the third line, okay, here's a new point, a new main idea. And then the fourth line is indented to show, oh, this is a description about that second main idea. Did I even read the full verse yet without stopping? Just in case I didn't, let's do that again. Always chanting my glories, endeavoring with great determination, bowing down before me, these great souls perpetually worship me with devotion. I think I did. So offering obeisances and chanting and glorifying, these are the two main verbs. And they're different. This is what I was going to say, is that like namaskar, offering obeisances, that's like reminds me of Islam, submission. Kind of, this is a very grave and serious form of worship. And then kirtan is jovial, joyful, and so on. And they're both worship. They're both worship that is naturally and perpetually offered to Krishna by these great souls. This is another reason the Bhagavad Gita is so special. We have some religions like Islam that only focus on obeisances, and then some sects like our own sect, following Lord Chaitanya, that do, to be honest, really mostly just stress the kirtan and the happy, jovial parts of worship. That's modern, that's contemporary ISKCON, that's Chaitanya, that's our line. But the Shastra that our line is based off of is much more, to be honest, is much more well-rounded than what you'll see in your average standard ISKCON center, Gaudiya Math, etc. And that's really, everything follows the Acharya, the various leelas and personality of the Acharya accordingly. So like when I was in Mayapur and I bounced in and out of a Gaudiya Math real quick, it had a different vibe. It had a much more serious academic, contemplative kind of bhav to it than any other ISKCON temple I've been, and that it perfectly matches Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Swami, who was a, pardon my language, but hardcore academic. It's not saying Prabhupada isn't, but Prabhupada used his genius, his academic scholarly genius, to make the scriptures widely accessible, whereas Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Swami used his academic and scholarly genius to make very rare, special, talented academic souls have Krishna, in small numbers, in a different time period, and so on. But that still is true today. I mean, I've read, if I'm, no offense, but getting bored of the widely accessible Prabhupada, I go straight to Bhaktisiddhanta Swami, and I'm not satisfied because I don't get it because it's above my level. And so if you need that sort of thing, it's there. And so, yeah, what are the ISKCON centers like? It's all about preaching. Really, that's what it should be about, because that's what Prabhupada was all about. So it's all about prasadam, kirtans, and colorful garlands. The whole vibe is all about like making this a juicy candy nectar experience. So on the off chance that someone who doesn't know anything just stumbles in there, you're like, whoa, this is like a different planet, bro. And that's what worked, especially in the 60s and 70s, people would stumble in on acid off the streets in New York and San Francisco, and they'd be like, whoa, I'm in another loka, bro. And then some would stay, some would not stay, but it was, immediately attractive. And I think we've still, maintained that Prabhupada Acharya bhav. Of course, the problem is once you actually understand these things, it gets a little boring and lame because it's kind of rare to get a class or something that goes a little bit deeper. And we also don't focus at all on building character and, anything basically past Kanista Adhikari Bhakti is not commonly found. Moving on, that's enough semi-offenseful things for me to say for now, I think. So the purport from Prabhupada here, which is not that long, it's about a page each for each of these verses, seems to be quite optimistic. He hints at The final verse in this cluster, in this purport, he hints at the next verse where Krishna talks about a devotee who's not a great soul, who is a little bit lesser and worships the impersonal form of the Lord. But even though a great soul does so much devotion to God, including, and Prabhupada mentions this here, following, quote, determined activities like fasting on appearance days and Ekadasi. The second verse in this chapter talks about how devotional service is not only easy, but can be performed in a happy mood. Anyone can do it from any position, any walk of life, anywhere in the world. Anyone can become a Mahatma. But, just because you can do it in a happy mood, though, doesn't mean it's cheap. It's not some cheap thing. Remember, just once you start getting all like, whoa, this is so great, you come back to your senses. Remember, what did Krishna just tell us? Nitya Yukta, eternally, perpetually engaged. So if that's not true for you, then you're not there yet. You're not a great soul. So, just because I don't want to demean others. Like, you still should pad yourself on the back for getting to this point where you're like, okay, I can read the Gita regularly. I can follow my live stream or some other devotee's live stream and get some benefit from it. But, if you're really doing it and you're really a great soul, this will be the only thing that you do. There will not be other things that you do, which is not true for me. So I am not a great soul, according to Sri Krishna in these here verses. On to verse 15. Others who are engaged in the cultivation of knowledge worship the Supreme Lord as the one without a second, diverse in many, and in the universal form. So the previous two verses are about those who are fortunate and great enough to see and understand the personal form of the Supreme Lord. This verse is talking about someone who is certainly pious because they're dedicating their life to cultivating knowledge as opposed to, just making money or banging women or whatever. But they still have not yet seen how the Supreme Lord is truly personal. But even so, such a soul will still see the Supreme Lord as the one without a second, as supreme, and having a powerful universal form and being diverse within that universal form. So even within the realm of impersonal God worship, the person described here and the deity described here is still quite more advanced than a lot of other things we see here in many Buddhist sects, for instance, and Taoists. There's no talk of Lord. There's no talk of God or Lord. It's just like null. It's just the void, the one. And there is no second because it's all one. It's often quite a bit more impersonal and more one, but it's still, because everything is one, you're so close to being caught in that trap where I'm God. It's like, no, you're not. Even though you may have some nice little superpowers from your yoga practice, definitely happens, you're not God. You may be a God, but you're not the God. Of course you're not. So in the purport here, Prabhupada introduces three new kinds of people who are still lower than the four kinds of devotees we learned about earlier: the financially destitute, the inquisitive, and those engaged in cultivating knowledge, and the distressed. So the three new ones who are still lower than those four are the following. 1, he who worships himself as one with the Supreme Lord. 2, he who concocts some form of the Supreme Lord and worships that. And 3, he who accepts the universal form, the Vishvarupa of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and worships that. And out of the above three, who is the lowest? It should be obvious. It was to me after reading this, and I hope it's obvious to you too. Who is the lowest of these three and also the most predominant? Remember, we're in Kali Yuga. But then again, it's just basic math and statistics. Normal distribution curves. It should be true in any yuga, actually, that the most rare occurrence will be the most pure devotee, and the most common occurrence will be the least pure devotee. That's, I believe, just a normal distribution bell curve. Anyway, who is the lowest? It's those who worship themselves as the Supreme Lord, thinking themselves to be monist, and these are the most predominant. That's almost word for word what Prabhupada says. But once again, even these third-class people, whatever, are still worshiping the Lord in a different form. The universe is also a form of the Lord. That's that. I'm too busy. I've got too many other things to do. So we're going to stop there at 32 minutes. Should be perfect for everyone. And next week, stream number 69, we will do verse 16. Hare Krishna. Jai Srimad Bhagavad Gita, as it is. Oh, there's no picture of Prabhupada on here. That's too bad. There he is. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Jai Shri Vaishnavas, Vaishnavis everywhere. Haribol!